All right, it's all on the record now. All right, so good morning and good evening to everyone. I'm John Schendt, work for Vista Ascent Solutions, and we've been primarily integrating our Layer 7 API gateways for several years now in different technologies. And so I wanted to kind of give you guys a little bit of an overview on the things that we've been doing specifically with OpenTelemetry. So it's a preview capability for version 11.1. But you'll see here that there's a ton of value already. So I'm going to try to get through all these slides in 7 minutes, and then we're going to get to the actual fun stuff. Because I think everyone, if you don't know enough about OpenTelemetry, we'll get through it in the demo portion as well. OpenTelemetry, open source observability framework. Really, what that means is there is a kind of a singular, normalized, unified process to combine all of the different facets of data that an application may want to present or that a user may want to see into a common place or a common framework. And so the funny thing was when we were looking at open telemetry in the beginning, so well, we've already got that. And I mean, the answer is most people have that. Most people have built this. They've built it with their own tools, their own techniques, their own data that they wanted to see. And that's exactly why this open source framework was created, because everyone was having these individual stovepipe monolithic systems to monitor. And so, well, why don't we make a common framework to do all that for us? And so what we've got is kind of that spec that can reach into an application that can look at a server. So if you think about like a Windows Task Manager, that's probably one of the more primitive versions of an observability framework, but it allows you to get a little bit more in depth and dive in further on different things you might be looking for. Is there a question?
So only possibility is we will do the so
did you mute all?
Okay. So the OpenTelemetry kind of framework or how the data flow works is really a pretty simple framework. Like I said, it's a normalized data set. So you have traffic, and there's an SDK and an API. We're looking at the microservice right now. And using OTLP, which is Open Telemetry Protocol, that normalized data gets sent into a collector, which can then be viewed by a front-end API. I did want to note that Kubernetes also has hooks into OpenTelemetry, so you can reach into your Kubernetes deployment. All the major cloud providers have OpenTelemetry capabilities, so they can reach into as well. And then you can start observing, you can start visualizing, you can start deriving insights on performance and health and anomalies. You want to see when stuff is going wrong, right? As much as we all love everything to be green all the time, it's you get the best insight when things aren't green. So for today, we're going to be looking at software gateways. There are already a lot of references out there for the containerized gateway, but like I said, this is what my customer uses, and so this is where we're most familiar with. So today, I'm going to show you the server config. It's 11 lines or less of server config. I'm going to show you the cluster-wide properties. I think there's 4 of them, and really only 2 or 3 that you need to set. And then we're going to go into the collector and front-end config as well. So we're going to be taking this flow first and foremost. One thing I also wanted to mention is some of the resources I used to get up to speed. These were a combination of really, really good things to get me familiar with OpenTelemetry, and then also some resources that I found additional configuration options. So since I know we are recording and not everyone has these slides, I'm just going to highlight this so hopefully people can see the URL that's in there. People can stop recording or pause the recording when they need to and get the information they need to.
John, when we post those, we'll put them in the post as well as the video.
Perfect. Yeah. So the first link was the tech docs page. So if you go into the tech docs for the 11.1 Gateway, there's a section on open telemetry. That was very helpful. The GitHub page may be a little less public, or not less public, but less known. And there were some things in here that really helped expand the aperture for some of the configuration. And then finally, this isn't a love letter to Elastic, but they helped me set up a lot of stuff on here really quickly. We'll go into some of that too, but this setting up the entire infrastructure turned into about a 5-minute exercise where I had to do about 30 seconds of work. So some nice things there. So I will get into some of the configuration first. If at any point in time there's any questions, either about the stuff that we just talked about or the stuff we're going to, just feel free to interrupt me. We're good for it. So this is kind of a working session. So what I've got up right now, pretty boring, but it's an EC2 instance that's got a software gateway loaded on it. So we're running everything we should be running. Everything's up and running. And I have escalated into a root login because we're going to go into some of the system properties files. So you're going to see a lot of normal things, and I've tried to make this the font a little bit bigger so people can see what's going on. From a server configuration, this is all we had to do for OpenTelemetry. So we set up a custom service name. So it's the SSG VAS deployment. We'll talk about what that, if you don't set this, a service name will still be set for you. It will just be the host name of whatever instance you're working on. So if you're in Kubernetes, that might be a little bit different. It might go to the namespace. And then some of the endpoints. So I will do a split screen, and you can see this along with the Elastic configuration. This was literally a copy paste job. Elastic handled the rest. And this is really to tell the endpoint where we're going and what protocol to use. So in this case, we're using HTTP protobufs.
Do you think maybe you could turn off the colors in your putty session just to make it easier to see?
Sure. Oh, is that
Thanks.
is that cyan a little rough?
It's the blue. It just looks really dark.
Oh, so these are all comment file, or these are all comment lines. So
Okay.
nothing here, but I'll see what I can do here.
Yeah, David, you don't need the comments.
And to be fair, it was all
you if you need.
and to be fair, it was all system generated by the system properties anyways. So this is just at the bottom of the system properties file. Yeah, I'll try not to build my terminal
Just cat
session.
the file from the command line instead of opening it in the editor.
Well, you can just turn off the colors in putty if you go to the settings.
We'll keep on going. Yeah.
Let's skip that for now. They're just comments anyway.
Okay.
Important stuff stands out. So
Yeah, here we go. So now it's all at the bottom. So then we get into the global auto configure. This is really an SDK option. So we had talked just briefly about what the SDK being needed in that microservice deployment. So this just enables that SDK to communicate with us, and then this line as well. So now we know that we're talking in Java. We're enabled. You can write your own global auto configure if you really want to, but like I said, I was going for ease of deployment. And then again, metrics exporters. This is how we're getting all the metrics information out. We're also going to be talking in that OpenTelemetry protocol. And then the things that I found from the GitHub page are these last 5 lines. This is really what kind of opened the box on some of the capabilities that we had. So enabling OpenTelemetry APIs, enabling a lot of the instrumentation, getting some of the metrics and telemetry coming out. So again, these are the 11 lines that got me to the promised land, I guess. When we get into the cluster-wide properties, I also wanted to highlight those. There's going to be a slightly smaller font here. But when we go into the various, the 4 or 5 cluster-wide properties here. So without OTEL enabled being true in the cluster-wide properties, which kind of makes sense, you're not going to get any data coming out. Metrics prefix, we moved this through. We're not going to really show a lot of what it does on the demo. I believe it's an SSG underscore or an L7 underscore if you leave that blank or don't have that included. Service metric enabled. This also got us a lot of the service metrics that we'll see. So this is really kind of sending all that data through that we were talking about. And then finally, the trace configs. This is a powerful little thing. It takes a JSON format, and really what it does is it allows you to see all of the trace information. And we'll talk about that in a couple minutes. The tracing information is some of the most powerful stuff I've ever seen. You get all of the benefit of being able to look through the policy dashboard or any of the policy manager, like the service debugger, but you get all the assertion latencies at the same time. It's super powerful. We'll take a look at it. This essentially just says, give me everything. So everything that has a resolution path, I want to see it. So those were the 5 cluster-wide properties, the 11 service properties. And when you're done, you do a restart on your gateway and they all apply. So some of the cluster-wide properties can be modified without a gateway restart, but it's probably best just to, if you're already going to be messing around in here, to do that anyways. The other thing I wanted to bring up that I did add in here is FileBeat. So specifically, I know it's going to be dark again, guys. Specifically, I wanted to see the audit logs come through. So this current implementation of OpenTelemetry does not have the audit files, the logging that you would expect in the SSG logs to come through. So I set up a simple FileBeat to get me in there. I added a cloud ID, which we'll see in a second, and then an API key down here that I'm just not going to show for right now. But that was the only interesting configuration on FileBeats. Okay. That was, like I said, that was all of our configuration on the server side, on the Layer 7 side. What I will say about Elastic Cloud is I picked this up through the AWS Marketplace. If you go directly to their site and set up an account and do it that way, you get I think it's 3 weeks of free trial, or at least 1 week. And then if you call and say you want more, they'll give you another 2 on top. So that was kind of nice. I didn't get that, so I just got the 1 week of free. So I want to talk a little bit about pricing before we get into the nuts and bolts, because this isn't free. It's a managed service, especially by Elastic. So it's not, but there's some things that you can do to reduce your cost. So cloud provider, region, all this stuff is pretty boilerplate. And you'll see right now we're paying about $600 a month if we were to go with this deployment. If you can bring down, and this is all through a pricing calculator. So if you are not running in a production environment or don't have high availability requirements, or really just trying to test it out, you can drop that down to 1 zone, reduce your cost quite a bit. You are at risk of data loss with fault tolerance. So you can potentially lose some data. Like I said, if you're not working in a production environment or even a test environment, you're just testing it out, this is kind of a good idea. And all of these are configurable. So if you want a slightly smaller footprint, you see that's bringing down the cost even more. You can get it down to really just after your 3-week trial, you just need 30 gigs of storage. It's $34 a month. So this comes with Elasticsearch. It comes with Kibana. It comes with your fleet integration server and enterprise search. So you get a lot in here. So you guys can mess around with some of the deployment settings. I opted for a slightly smaller version. I think we're paying maybe $150 a month. But once you get in here, that's when you'll see some of the interesting things. So yeah, you'll get healthy with warnings. I'm only in one availability zone, so that's what it's going to complain about. The cloud ID was what we picked from what we plucked and put into our Logstash configuration, or our FileBeat configuration, sorry. And then an Elasticsearch endpoint was copied into our let's see. And then the Elasticsearch deployment gets set right in there. So all we have to do is just copy endpoint, and it's already in your service. So the only other thing that I had to configure on here, and this was a little bit of a gotcha. So in the fleet service, which is kind of how Elastic is managing all of its infrastructure, they have an agent policy. And that agent policy is how your OpenTelemetry is going to talk to this collection server and how everything else is going to get visualized. So I did have to make one little change to this, specifically for Elastic APM, to go through and add an anonymous agent access. So what we did here, this is because I didn't want to go through the work to set up the keys and get all that stuff working. And so instead I just allowed OpenTelemetry /Java. That is going to be the agent's name. We'll see that in a second. Allow that to talk to us. Allow that to talk to the collector. And after that, we were pretty much off to the races. I did allow FileBeat as a service, and then our deployment as a service as well. I don't think we need FileBeat as an agent, but I'm not going to change it mid-demo like that. So that was the only modification we made. So once your deployment is created, it takes about 5 minutes. You can actually come in already, get all of your info, or see all of your menu items. The one we're going to be looking at is APM today. And then you'll see here, we've already got our service name. We've got some latency. I've already been pushing some data through, and our throughput. So before we get there, I'm going to say I haven't made any modifications to this dashboard. This is what you get out of the box. So already for the last 15 minutes, I can look at average latencies, average throughputs. It's compared with the day before. I can get the transactions. So I've seen people that are hitting specific endpoints on my gateway. This is the actual name of the gateway service. And then any sort of failed transactions. Thankfully, I haven't had a lot. We can, because we're running on Elastic, I can come back and I can say, give me everything from 15 days ago. And then this becomes a much different chart. So poke. And then as I started building the throughput charts here, you see we kind of started getting into some of the bigger stuff. So already you might have been able to see, let's go down to 1 day. So that looks a little bit better. We'll remove the comparison. You can already see that we've got a little bit less traffic in terms of the different endpoints we're hitting, but a lot more average traffic. And so because we're running in Elastic, I can do a grab and filter and zoom in and get pretty much any bit of information that I need at any time. And so what this does is this kind of shows you, again, who's hitting, or what is being hit on our gateways, how long it is taking those requests to come through, and how many times people are hitting them. And like you can see, these are all kind of correlated together. And again, no failed transactions yet, but we'll get there. So out of the gate, you're already getting quite a bit of information. Now, if you want to dive in further, so my getJWT endpoint, which is reaching out, hitting some third-party services, getting some information about a user, returning a JSON string, and then caching that to a service. It's actually the thing we were talking about at January's office hours. We can get a lot more information about this specific endpoint. So now we can see the latency distribution over time. Or latency distribution for this time spot. So at the lowest, there was a request that took 198 milliseconds. At the highest, we were hitting 10 seconds. So if I want to go in and see 198 milliseconds to 10 seconds is a pretty big delta. I can actually go in, and this is where the tracing comes in. I can actually go in and look at all of the assertions and how much latency they each incurred. So now we're not messing with the assertion latency millisecond assertion. So now you don't have to worry about structuring your assertions and your policies in such a way that if you have if at least one assertion has to evaluate to true, where that could your assertion millisecond context variable could provide a circuit in there or break that. Now you don't have to worry about that anymore. This is all coming out of the gate. So we can see, oh, here's our spot. This has taken 8,500 milliseconds. Oh, so now someone put in a forced delay to introduce latency. Okay. That's because this normally takes about 30 milliseconds, so it's not very fast. So what we've done in here is introduce a random generator that goes between 0 and 10 seconds of latency, and then does the work after that. But all of these can be collapsed, can be expanded. You can get as much information or as little information as you want. And that's really the power in OpenTelemetry and being able to have this all set up natively. Is you've got the framework set up to do it day one. You're not generating frameworks. You're not generating visualizations. This is all done for you. And if you want to come in the metadata for this request itself, you can see that it was a service. You can get the GOID. You can get request URLs. Who is hitting this endpoint? In fact, you guys can. This is a publicly facing endpoint. So if you want to be part of my sample set, you can be part of my sample set. You've got timestamps. You kind of already had that up here before, but again, you've got the agent name. This is the one that we added into that anonymous access. So this is if you don't have that in anonymous access, you will get either a 500 or a 401 in your SSG logs saying that anonymous access is not approved or your API key is wrong. And then you can come through and just get all of this information to include the probably the most three beneficial bits of data for OpenTelemetry, which is your span ID, your timestamp, and your trace ID. And that's really what makes all this other stuff possible in the tracing section. And then, hey, we had success. So
John,
what I have, yes.
Yeah, can I ask you a question? In the
Of course.
policy,
Mhm.
the policy, do you add any audit details, or is it just out of the box? The policy without auditing?
Yeah, I can show you
this
the policy.
information.
I can show you the policy. Oh, so there's no added details out of the box. So the policy is really just, it's a little
No debug
10-liner.
mode or anything on? No, okay.
Nope. We have audit messages in policy, so I can see it in the dashboard, but this is all being generated outside of anything that's happening here.
And if you disable this one, row 2, then
Sure.
you get nothing in OTEL, or?
No, you'll still get everything in OTEL.
Okay, perfect.
Yep.
Okay.
Where you? Mhm.
Yeah, perfect. Okay.
And so I mean that's a great question, because yeah, you don't want to accidentally disable things, or not know that you're enabling things. So one of the other things, and we talked about briefly, is FileBeat. And so FileBeat is set up again to move all those SSG logs into this same database. So it's not necessarily part of APM, but it's still indexable and searchable. And so again, I brought all of those into FileBeat, or through FileBeat into this database. I didn't do any special indexing or correlation or aggregation. And all of the server logs, all of the SSG logs also appear for this request. So now we're not only transmitting the latency information on every millisecond, we're not only able to see all of the visualization on what's happening at any time. Now we are also able to get the correlating and corresponding SSG log information as well. Now I've got mine and I put my SSG logs in JSON just because it's a little bit more readable. But this doesn't transform the data, it just adds it as it would be. So you're getting all of this stuff. And this is where that OpenTelemetry framework with a little bit of elastic file beat really starts kind of changing the game on things that we had to do. Before I would spend hours and hours combing through logs or telling people, hey, I need you to hit this endpoint again when they say, hey, something's broken. Now I can go in and actually look at the server logs for their specific request at a specific time and figure out where things have broken or completed.
Just one thing, sorry. So I guess that when you do this and you've got all these metrics exposed, obviously you are not on a busy gateway to do this, because otherwise you'll start getting some latency introduced from pulling all these and gathering all these metrics themselves. I guess you wouldn't switch this on in production like this.
So it's a conversation, right? So if your gateway is performance spec'd to exactly your use case right now, you'd probably want to do this in a development environment first, migrate it to a test environment, go through that rigor to make sure you're not,
John, I think someone might have done a mute all, so you'll have to come out.
Yeah, we lost you there, John.
Hey, there we go. Okay. Yep, I think I got muted there. So it's a conversation. So if you're spec'd for exactly your use case, this does incur some performance, without a doubt. I mean, you're just making more IO. I will say that FileBeat is pretty passive. It's not streaming. In fact, that's actually a good thing to note. This slightly gray box here is data that may not be completely available yet, because in the background, we've got other things that are processing here. This is on a totally different server, so this is not incurring gateway server performance. But yes, I mean, it does take more resources to do this.
I guess you can tune your cluster-wide property down to just one or two services that you actually want to do this for as well.
Exactly.
So you can on the fly keep switching over to different services to monitor them at different times.
Yes, and that's actually that's part of the trace config as well. Is I have configured it to be fairly chatty. There are ways you can exclude different messages in here as well. So the big one was the MTOM message that comes in at the beginning of pretty much every policy. There's not a lot of reason to have that in there, so you can pare this set down to be a little less chatty as well. There's lots of different performance tweaking and things you can do to make it work with your use case, which is also kind of the benefit of the flexibility.
Yeah, I can imagine actually dynamically being able to change that cluster-wide property when there's some issues and errors, if you've got something like a framework on your gateway. Which could then tune that and then capture that data while it's having a problem, while you're serving the problem. So yeah,
absolutely. And in fact, I'm double checking that it doesn't say that there's a gateway restart, so you could run this on the fly, and just have specific things speaking. Sure, or even policy. If it finds an error, add this to the list of things to go and change that cluster-wide property. There's definitely some advanced stuff you can do with this.
Excellent. Thank you.
Do we have a chance to configure the content of the messages? With this configuration, we can select some of the services, but what about the content of the messages?
You mean the content of the response?
The content of the metrics actually, we can consider the request latency metric, for example, for each services, or request some HTTP parameters, or even the payload size. Payload itself, it can be too much actually for the OpenTelemetry for any logging purposes actually. But wanted to get, for example, using this dashboard, can we understand the metric time spent in gateway and time spent in backend, for example?
Oh, are you speaking to like the front end latency and the back end latency things that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So you could derive that.
We do actually optionally emit service metrics with OpenTelemetry too. So it is something you enable, but then you get all the service metrics you'd expect from the dashboard. We also have a telemetry metric assertion that you can choose to include in policy to generate custom metrics. So you can create whatever metrics you want using that. And then we do have a backlog of enhancements to allow users to create custom attributes for service metrics and, trace spans too, which will allow you to attach more custom information to both of those things in the future.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Ben. I did not include that in this demo.
Yeah,
Telemetry metrics you can insert directly into the data that's getting fed into Elastic in this case, and get some pretty cool things.
and that's custom metric. The service metrics can be automatic. You don't need that assertion for those. But that's the custom metric if that's the assertion for custom metrics if you want them.
Right.
Okay. I also wonder the difference between the existing internal audit sync policy, for example, as it's a flexible policy, and by enabling or disabling the level of the audits using the cluster properties, we can have all the messages like, for example, we can also measure the time spent in each assertion using the internal audit sync policy, for example. But this also brings too much cost on the gateway. But in general, I also want to understand the difference between the existing logging mechanism of the gateway.
Sure. So we can dive in. So yeah, that's a good point. I did exclude some of the values from our from the messages that get sent out. So this isn't specifically to OpenTelemetry. This is just me trying not to have a full database with things that I don't really care about at that point. When we get into the differences of you were talking specifically about the log and audit syncs, right? So actually, let's get into the audit sync.
A little bit to that while you bring that up, John. Essentially, audit syncs are completely separate from what we're doing with OpenTelemetry, but logs can be correlated with what we are doing with OpenTelemetry. And otherwise, all of the Gateway's logging framework still applies to, how the gateway will log what and when. It's your job to make sure that those logs go from those locations the log events are being sent to back to your OpenTelemetry target on the backends for the correlation that would happen with traces and metrics. And for that, John's using FileBeat. There's lots of other things that customers are already using to send their logs somewhere. From an audit sync policy perspective, you can still create log events for your audit events if you include the audit category in your log sync. You just don't get the full Gateway audit event viewer user experience for those where there's a relationship for message type audit events with associated logs. But for the most part, the same information can be sent via logs through OpenTelemetry for correlation to traces and metrics.
Yep.
So hopefully that answers your question, is it?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
I did promise you guys something that failed, so I wanted to find a failure here, but it's not going to be in our JWT. So we do have so part of this, like we'd mentioned, was also talking about anomalies or talking about failures, things that are going wrong in the gateway. And so I do have a single example of a failed test case, or of a failed policy here. And so rather than going through the entire policy, which is quite a bit longer than this, we'll see this failure case. So now you can kind of start diving down. Someone says, "Oh, I failed. It was around this time." You can start looking at these failures and how they are choosing to expose themselves, and then again through the FileBeat integration, actually see where your if anything was logged on how you failed. So in this case, we had input variable curnum is not a multi-valued context variable. So immediately, and not having to debug things in real time, you can go in. This was the 24th, so this was 2 days ago, but we can go back to this one as well, which was, I guess, still on the 24th, wasn't it? But I can come back, 2 days in the past to see where something failed and triage and figure out what was going on. It is a pretty powerful set, and like I said, this isn't a love story to Elastic or a love note to Elastic, but they do have a lot of other options and extras that you can add onto these to get some insights and set some alerts, set email correlation or email if they've hit over a certain threshold, and even go in and do some machine learning anomaly detection. But I didn't do that for this. that costs a little more.
Was this dashboard all, specific to Elastic? Is it something that we provided, or is it something they provide?
This is something Elastic provides out of the gate. So I did nothing to configure any of this. This is really just utilizing the OpenTelemetry specification. So now, because OTEL knows what this, or because Elastic knows this format, they know how to derive some of these dashboards on creation time.
Which is pretty slick, because this is pretty close to what you might want for a gateway. We do provide examples of using OpenTelemetry with Elastic together with our operator. And those examples do have dashboards we created for Elastic for our gateway. So those would be a starting point for an Elastic user. But I think John made a great point early on too. One of the really nice things about OpenTelemetry is you can use whatever OpenTelemetry compatible tools you want to collect and present this information. So John chose Elastic. Other users might choose the Grafana LGTM stack. But if you go out to OpenTelemetry, there's a link to all the vendors that support OpenTelemetry and how. And it's a very long list of very popular vendors in the industry. So you don't have to choose Elastic to get these capabilities.
Any other questions? Anything anyone wants to see?
I have a question, please. Question. You used OpenTelemetry for sending metrics, right? And why are you using FileBeat for logs instead of using OpenTelemetry directly?
So in this current, so on the Broadcom Tech Docs, there's a little blurb in there that audit logs are not included in this preview version of OpenTelemetry.
Okay.
Ben can speak to it. Maybe it's in the future. That's not me. So instead, we use FileBeat, which is something I've been familiar with, and that was a pretty quick integration to bring everything else in. The interesting part about that is I didn't have to configure any sort of correlation like I thought I was going to have to. I thought I was going to have to create some custom indices, but OpenTelemetry picked all of it up and started correlating it natively. So that was a happy surprise.
Yeah, as long as you get the logs back to the OpenTelemetry target and they contain the right correlation IDs in the log events, which would be trace ID and span ID to correlate logs with traces. Most backends are just gonna be able to almost automatically correlate those two things together, like Elastic did for John. John's right. We don't today with the gateway. We use the OTEL SDK to send metrics and traces using OTLP protocol to an OpenTelemetry collector directly. The only thing we're doing with logs is if you have trace enabled, we will inject a trace ID and span ID into the log events, but otherwise our logging framework remains the same and everything applies to logs that get generated, you know, and ultimately correlated through OpenTelemetry. And that's by design. If we were to, you know, actually send log events using OTLP directly to a collector, we would have to make significant changes to our logging framework that would only apply to OpenTelemetry users. And also, most users have existing ways of forwarding log events to other backends anyway, and they can continue to use those ways, and this will all come together. So we actually don't have any plans to change the way we're doing logging for OpenTelemetry, because this already seems to be working very well for people with, you know, minimal effort. So
yeah, I do have on the screen there.
Thank you. Gotcha. Thank you.
Are you doing any formatting of the logs, or are they coming in the standard format? Are you like converting them to JSON or?
All log formatting that existed before OpenTelemetry applies to log formatting today with OpenTelemetry. The only thing we added to logging with OpenTelemetry is if tracing is enabled, we'll inject trace ID and span ID into log events that get generated during service transaction processing. So not even all log events, right? Only the events that are related to a service transaction. And that's
I just wasn't sure if you know the logs that he's sending over to Elastic were formatted in a certain way, if Elastic expected them to be JSON or.
Nope. I put them in JSON because it's a little more readable for me, and it saves on some of the file sizes. But other than that, they can come in any format. Like Ben said, it's there's no transformation that Elastic does or any of the OTEL providers do. It's just logs in.
Cool.
Ben, Dave Machadi, the trace ID, is that configurable? What if you were to look at an ID that came in a request?
Trace ID is automatically generated.
Okay.
We will respect context propagation though. So if we receive a trace ID with an incoming request in its context, that'll become the parent ID of our traces, so that you can get end-to-end tracing across multi-hop transactions that our gateways are part of.
Got it.
I'm just going to do a time check here. We got about 10 minutes left. So back to you, John, if there's anything you wanted to close with.
Now, the only thing is, you know, I wanted to kind of show that we showed a lot of successful messages. We showed that one failed message. I did break this endpoint for a little bit of time just so you could see a nice curve of failed endpoint or failed transactions and how we were able to get them back green or blue in this case. So you can see that it's not just blips and blips. They show that latency both on the successful and the failed transactions. You can see that in as a nice visualization as well.
I have another question, John.
Hmm?
If you know, probably the transaction ID, something like that, but if we were to respond to the requester with that ID, could we, you know, allow them to come into Elastic and see the trace of that transaction? Is it searchable based on that transaction ID or any transaction ID that we want to apply to the ever provide back to the requester?
So you could search the transaction ID. It's definitely possible. Ideally, it depends. Ideally, you wouldn't necessarily need the transaction ID to see some of the failures or successes, especially if you can get some measurable information on when issues or when successes were occurring. I will say, because this is all in Elastic, or all in some sort of database that can be aggregated and visualized, we've only been exploring the APM service. You can also go into pure Kibana and derive any sort of dashboards. So all of this information, all of the OpenTelemetry data, is searchable, indexable. So if you ever wanted to create your own visualizations, or even do your own indexing or searching, so that's where the transaction ID could definitely come in handy, as if you wanted to go a little out of the box and write your own.
Yeah, I was just envisioning it like a self-service dashboard for, you know, development teams. You know,
Right, and that's where Kibana would be a little bit easier to give some of that public access, because then you're defining those roles and permissions. APM is designed to be a little bit more power user focused, but you could very easily take the charts in here and create your own Kibana dashboards, do the exact same thing that they're doing, and get the same results. But then show that with, whoever your customer is, you can tailor it for them, so they're not, going around trying to figure out what this context variable is, or what do you mean by all assertions must evaluate to true? So it kind of removes some of the transparency, but reduces questions too.
Cool, thanks.
So now everyone's going to use OpenTelemetry, right?
Hey, John, I've learned a lot here. Yeah, if there are no other questions, I don't know if Pam's on the call, but I just want to say thank you from us. I think that was a great session, some real good interactions and questions from everybody on the call. So yeah, thank you very much for hosting that.
No problem. And I put up my email address here. If anyone needs anything, anyone's got any questions or follow-ups, feel free to get hold of me.
Yes, and thank you again, John. And again, a reminder for everyone, we'll be on the GoToWebinar platform next time, and hope that you all join us then. Thank you.
Thanks, Pam. Thanks, everybody.
Right. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, John. Great job.
Right.